Coming up next on Another View, a roundtable discussion about African American women. When you think of Black women, what comes to mind? A successful, hardworking, God-fearing, family-loving woman? Or a stereotype like Sapphire or a welfare mom or the I can do it all and don't need a man woman? There's a new survey out about how African American women feel about themselves, relationships, finances, religion, and discrimination. We'll examine the results with Washington Post reporter Krista Thompson, and a roundtable of local African American women weigh in with their thoughts. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee, and Another View is next, right after this news from NPR.
Discussing the issues and celebrating the successes of the African American community. This is Another View.
And good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Recently, the Washington Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation released the results of a national survey on the attitudes of Black women in America today. According to the survey, nearly 3/4 of African American women say that now is a good time to be a Black woman in America, although half of those surveys say racism is a big problem in this country. We put together a panel of African American women from Hampton Roads to give their thoughts on this subject. Please welcome Dr. Kalita Nichols Fairfax, Associate Professor and Honors Liaison for the Evelyn R. Strong School of Social Work at Norfolk State University. That is a title. Welcome, Kalita.
Hello.
Glad to have you with us today. Ms. Denise Good, who works for the federal government. Hi, Denise.
Hi, Barbara.
Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Ms. Ashley Smith, Miss United States 2011. Congratulations.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. And Ms. Alvian Lyons, a development consultant and relationship coach. Alvian, welcome to the program.
Good afternoon.
So glad all of you are here. But first, we'll start our conversation with Washington Post reporter Ms. Krista Thompson, who joins us on the telephone. Hi, Krista. How are you?
Hi. Glad to be on with you.
Good. Now, this survey, why did the Post and the Kaiser Family Foundation decide to focus on African American women?
You know, there's been interest for years. About 6 years ago, we did a similar survey of Black men, and that really just bubbled up in the newsroom. Mm-hmm. And since that time and the response we got from that series of reporting, we wanted to get back into it, but now really felt like the right time. I mean, aside from all of the attention that's being paid to the First Lady, there seemed to be some organic conversations that were taking place amongst Black women themselves, which we've seen come out in books about Black women redefining themselves, about, you know, how we're dealing with images and all that sort of thing. And so it just, everything clicked.
This is an encore presentation of Another View. Please hold your calls and we'll be back with a live broadcast next week.
Mm-hmm. So before we get into the actual survey and some of the numbers, can you tell us a little bit about the methodology and how it was done?
So this was done, like you mentioned, in partnership with the Kaiser Family Foundation and our polling group, which does all of our political polls and that sort of thing. And so we used a scientific poll. We oversampled Black women. It was a random survey, national, talked to 808 Black women, across the board, rich, poor, old, young, married, and single. So there's a good mix in here.
Different educational levels also.
That's right. That's right.
Mm-hmm. So I saw on the blog that you write that there was a lot of discussion about whether or not 800 women was enough to represent the entire country in terms of feelings. But people need to understand what about polls?
You know, I wish I had our pollster sitting right next to me who could really break it down. But essentially, this is a poll that's done randomly. It's not an online survey, which is sort of self-selecting. We talk to people who only use their cell phones for communication, so it's a true sample. You know, there's a margin of error, as there are with any polls. The larger your sample size is, the smaller the margin of error. But in our research, we found that a survey of this size and as the breadth of question that we asked hasn't been done since at least the 1980s.
Okay, so were there any surprises in terms of your reporting on this and seeing all the results? Did you have anything that you went, I didn't think that women would think that way?
Well, when we first got the data back, the number that really stood out to me was we asked the question about how important is being successful in your career. And 68% of Black women said that was very important to them. That was higher than white women by a significant margin. And then when we broke that down and looked across generational lines and looked at figures for Black women under the age of 35, 98% said being successful in a career was very important. So that really, for me, piqued my interest in asking about, how do we define success today? What does that look like?
And do we know what they said about that? What does it look like?
In follow-up interviews where you're sort of able to probe what some of these questions really mean, while Black women prioritize career over marriage in this survey, there really was a sense that they, want to have it all. For some single Black women that I spoke with, the idea that, I can work hard in my career, I can get my education, I can make money, that sort of thing, but I don't have control over, or sense that she didn't have control over whether she would find a husband or not, so she's going to throw her energy into the areas where she felt a greater sense of control. So that sentiment did come through, but overall, like you said, there was a really high level of satisfaction among Black women on both the questions of, is it a good time to be a Black woman in America, and are you satisfied with your life? More than 3/4 of Black women said that indeed they were.
So if we look at that marriage stat, though, because there's a lot of discussion about, and I'm going to bring in the rest of the panel in just a moment, but there's a lot of discussion about whether or not Black women have given up on marriage. And I believe the stats said 40% of Black women say getting married is very important compared to 55% of white women. But that goes back to what you were saying about that control issue.
Right. So, most of this came through the follow-up interviews, right? Because the data is really static. So when you talk to women about what that means, there was a sense for some that they had thought that they would have been married, by 40 or whatever the age the woman was that I happened to be speaking to. But if the chips didn't fall that way, that they were still satisfied with their lives. With their lives,
anyway. Khalida, you want to respond to that also? Because I know you studied relationships in the African-American community.
Yes. Krista, wonderful job with the article. Thank you for your work on this. And this is an appropriate topic because the Association for the Study of African-American Life and History, an organization founded by the late Carter G. Woodson, has adopted as this year's theme, Black Women in America's Culture and History. So this is a very relevant topic. I want to say that Black women today realize what they can control. And so, yes, they can get their education, earn a master's, earn a doctorate, earn a law degree. They can have employment and be entrepreneurs, and they can be homeowners and do some other really wonderful things because they can control those variables. Marriage is not necessarily a variable that can be controlled, but I was interested in hearing or reading in your article that there were women who didn't discount marriage, but marriage may come later in life, but knew they could find fulfillment in church work, in the wonderful relationships they have with other women. And so marrying at 35 or 40 isn't a bad thing. You're not an old maid, you're not an old hag, you're not frustrated. Also, I want to share that marriage has always been an important feature in the African American community. After enslavement, one of the first things Black folk did besides found a church was to go get married. So marriage has always been important, but we've never been shaped by marriage. Very different from other cultures because we've embraced our own.
But it's
identity.
very interesting, and Alvian, I want to turn this to you because there's that stereotype that that Black women are strong. They can do everything. They don't need a man. They don't want a man. And that's not necessarily the case.
Well, absolutely. I mean, the reality is that we have to balance so many different things as women. We have to consider our identity relative to the larger world. The benefit of our current situation is that we are not forced to fit within a box anymore, which has freed a lot of women to consider the possibility of having it all. The difficulty is that not everybody still operates from that perspective. Not everybody has taken on that new way of looking at things. There is a lot of pressure, particularly in my generation. I am the 35-ish generation. Mm-hmm. So I know I sound so much younger, don't I? Right?
Yes, you do.
And you look so much younger.
See, say it again. Okay. So in my generation, it's so often that we are sitting around and having conversations, and I'll be very frank. You'll often hear women say, what is wrong with her that at 40, nobody has proposed to her yet?
Mm. Well, and everybody in the world knows that I did not get married until I was 50 for the first time. And I got that a lot. People would say, well, what's going on with you? Or I even had relatives tell me it's because you're so focused on your career, you don't give time for anything else. Denise, have you ever faced that?
Oh, my goodness. I got married at 29, which I guess 18 years ago, I'm 48, seemed like, your clock is ticking. And I actually had a relative at a family reunion come up to me and say, tick, 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 I hear your clock ticking. What are you waiting for? And I said, frankly, I'm waiting for all the jerks like you to be taken so I can get out there and find me a great guy. That's what I'm waiting for. Would you go up to a 75-year-old relative and say, wow, you're losing bone density. Isn't it about time to break a hip?
Right.
Statistically speaking, you should have broken your hip by now. So I think it's just as foolish to think you're 75, you should be crumbling and breaking bones, that I'm 29, 35, and I should be taking the first offer that comes my way.
Absolutely.
Ashley, you were representing our 20-somethings.
I am.
And
okay.
do you still get pressure from family, from other women, from men to say, you know what? You're getting ready to get into your 30s now. You better hurry up.
I don't get as much pressure. I'm 23, so I think the people in my life really want me to finish school first. I think that's really imperative, and I'm seeing a lot of people in my age range who are looking towards that, and I think it is a little bit early. So just a tad. I'm going to wait a few more years before I go down that road. But what I'm seeing, though, in terms of relationships for that 20-some-odd range, is that relationships are still confusing. They are still complicated. And we live in such a social media-directed world when you're in your 20s that you're afraid of what people are going to think if you don't do this right, if you don't make the right decisions, if you don't find that great man and that sort of thing. But when you are focusing on a career, when you are focusing on your education, and when you're doing the right things, you get all this positive feedback. We live on feedback in your 20s. So relationships are still very hard to identify. They're very confusing. And I think that's what's really scaring a lot of young women in this age range is we just want approval. And, when you go down that wrong path, everybody kind of wags their finger at you and it's all shame, shame, shame.
Well, Krista, the ultimate couple in relationships right now are President Obama and Michelle Obama. And I know that you did some follow-up in terms of how African-American women see Michelle Obama in terms of being a role model. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. We did ask several questions about Michelle Obama, and black women described themselves as identifying with her, as sensing that she understands their problem, called her a role model. And in follow-up interviews, there was really a sense there were two things. This idea that some black women described her as a role model, as inspiring, and others described her as feeling very familiar to them, as having this sense that by her being on the national stage, on the world stage, she's mainstreaming what they already know about themselves to the world as a whole.
Something I found interesting in your article, that more than half of black women without a college education say Obama has changed their overall impression of black women, compared with 2 out of 10 black women with college degrees.
Yeah, that was an interesting figure.
Yeah.
And I think I'm probably still grappling with that one. I would have loved to have another week to work on that particular piece, but in some of the interviews that I did, this idea of implicit bias came up. Mm-hmm. It sort of describes a latent prejudice that comes because of images that are out there in society. And so while you may think that it's just an outside group misunderstanding your group, so an outside group misunderstanding Black women as a whole, implicit bias can take a hold within the group as well.
Exactly.
So you begin to see yourself in terms of these images.
Mm-hmm. So, Denise, for example, when you have the shows like Basketball Wives and Real Housewives of Atlanta and so forth, and then on the other side you have a Michelle Obama, why do you think society as a whole, or do you think society as a whole, looks at the basketball wife type image as being more accurate than the Michelle Obama image?
I've watched Basketball Wives and some of the Housewives. I don't watch them as a regular. I've seen them, mm-hmm. and it's a little bit too much anxiety for me, the bickering and because I feel like I'm of a generation, the last of the baby boomers, who it might seem kind of idealistic and romantic, but I feel like I'm my sister's keeper. I feel like it's my responsibility to carry on that legacy of love and support for all the women who came before me, my grandmother, born to slaves, my mother, her sisters, everybody. So I feel like, cutting a woman down, but a Black woman cutting a Black woman down, it seems like a crime, and I just can't get into that. And I talked to my daughter about the mean girl syndrome. She's a beautiful girl, she's smart, but I said, that's a responsibility. When you're pretty and smart, you have to be kind. Kindness is your power, not the ugliness that might generate from that.
Kalita, what do you think about that? I mean, the overall the negative stereotypes seem to take hold.
Well, for me, my interpretation of that stat is that we really need to understand what poor women grapple with every day. And so we have the benefit and the privilege and the blessing to have our education, be in different settings, living in a different community, interface with different people. But our poor sisters just don't have this in their lives every day. So my interpretation is that they really only see these images on TV.
Well, see, what's very interesting...
This is Alvian speaking. Go ahead.
What's very interesting to me listening, I immediately thought I was born in the wrong generation, because we are not friendly one to another in my generation at all. In general, it is a insider and outsider crowd very often. We came up in that generation that began to talk about the statistics that there were not going to be enough African American men when it came time to get married. We were the competition generation. So suddenly, when the ideal is to get married, if possible, you make sure you have your education, you balance those things out, but high in the priority list was marriage. So if you're told that we are in a time of inadequate options, limited ability, a time of scarcity does not breed collaboration. There's no teaming when we're supposed to compete. Different C's. Competition, collaboration, totally different C's. So if I'm competing with you for this limited resource of quality men, pulling you down and tearing you down is in my best interest. It's like politics. I need to destroy you in order to win. So we became a very different kind of generation, and I've watched it continue in ways that is really sad. So much so that it's really started to have some of myself and some of my peers are working on how can we do something different about this.
Barbara, can I say one more thing about the reality shows? I really think that the reality across the board is not good for women or images. It's not just the Atlanta Housewives or Basketball Wives, the California Housewives in New Jersey.
I just bring that up because they do focus on African American women, but you're right. I mean,
you can't tell a difference if you were blindfolded of the culture, bitterness and the anger.
Krista, let me ask you though, why do you think that more people think of Michelle Obama as being the exception rather than the rule?
Well, in follow-up interviews, I had people describe her as exceptional, one, because of her educational background, where she went to school, some of the most elite schools in the nation. And so that's a part of the conversation in terms of seeing anyone who's had those sorts of educational experiences being exceptional. So that's number one. And then I think the fact that she is now in the White House and with all of the demands that the role of First Lady requires, you see her in many different settings, in an attire that is not the everyday, and for some people that also hasn't put her in what you could call a special category.
Ashley, when you see a Michelle Obama, is that more of an expectation of yours?
For me, absolutely.
And for your, I know you can't speak for your whole generation.
I was going to say for me, no. But for those who I have encountered in my generation, it's not an expectation. It's, we're happy to see her there. We're happy to see her representing for Black women, but it's not something that we can attain. We really do look at her and put her on a high horse in my generation, quite frankly, because we do feel like she kind of slipped through the cracks. Unfortunately, it's a sad thing, but I feel like with my generation, it seems as if we literally put a glass ceiling on how far we can go, and we're starting to look at the options that are out there in the workforce. Socially, just based on what we believe we're going to be allowed to get, and we don't think we can get that far.
Isn't that interesting?
It's sad.
I'm surprised to hear that.
Oh yeah, I've seen it a lot. I've seen a lot of my friends even look at me and say, "We're surprised to see what you're doing, and we're very proud of you. But can you keep representing and keep getting out there, because we feel like you are going to be the one that's going to represent us." And I'm saying, why can't you represent yourself? It's sad.
Krista, you hear what Ashley is saying. Did you find any of that in the survey at all, in terms of young women and their feeling about where they could go?
No,
career-wise?
and I think in part we didn't ask a question that would tease that out. But in terms of the importance of career, that it's almost 10 for 10. If you stop 10 young Black women and ask them where their focus is, you're going to hear career and the desire to be successful there. Now, as you mentioned in the opening, Black women do feel that they still face racism, face sexism. We asked the question about how often do you feel that people think that you're not smart, or do you feel disrespected? And they rated fairly high on those questions as well. So you have a lot of things in the mix.
This is an encore presentation of Another View. Please hold your calls and we'll be back with you next week.
There was a question, Krista, that was asked on the survey, which was, which of the following do you identify with more, being a man or a woman, or being Black and white? And if I'm not mistaken, Black women, 50% of Black women said that they equated to being a man or a woman. But 90% of white women said that they equated to being a female, as opposed to 28% of Black women who said that they identified more with being Black than being a woman, versus 5% of white women saying they identify with being white as opposed to just being being a female.
Right, and I think that's interesting, and part of that came through in the story on Michelle Obama, because people talked about her racial identity as being, Black women talked about her racial identity as being very important to them, whereas some of the white women that I interviewed talked about her gender identity being very important to them. And so I think you see that play out just in some of the cultural nuances.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about the Washington Post Kaiser Family Foundation survey on African American women. Our guests are Krista Thompson, reporter for the Washington Post, Dr. Kalita Nichols Fairfax with the School of Social Work at NSU, Ms. Denise Good, who works for the federal government, Ms. Ashley Smith, Miss United States 2011, and Ms. Alvian Lyons, development consultant and relationship coach. We just got a caller who couldn't stay with us, but wanted you to address, Krista, and then I'll ask the panel also, to address music videos and how Black women are portrayed in them. Did that come up in the survey at all?
It did not come up in the survey, but it did come up in follow-up interviews. Mm-hmm. One in a family, 3 generations of Black women that I spent time with here locally, and they're teenagers in the household along with mom and grandmother, and feeling the need to have conversations about the images of Black women in the media and what the girls are digesting, and making sure that they are also constantly butting up against more positive images. Mm-hmm. And also I spoke with Beverly Bond, who is a DJ in New York, a hip-hop DJ, but also founder of Black Girls Rock, a philanthropic organization that focuses on Black women and images. And so in conversations with her, she talked about, it's not just about dealing with some of the images we see in hip-hop, but also making sure that we're reflected in all of the areas that we are, that are good and are bad,
Kalita, I see you shaking your head over here.
Krista, I knew that the video piece would come up invariably, and I think it really provides some evidence to what Miss USA has just shared with us, that generation is heavily impacted by TV. Older generations are not, and so that could be the reason why they're impacted by wider media images, as opposed to those of us who really grew up in our community are more so impacted by church influences and extended family and neighborhood influences. And so I think that the media may play a role. However, in terms of moving forward to looking at solutions, we have got to move to a place where we encourage younger women to have older people in their lives, to talk to older people on a regular basis. We can't control this. So we cannot control the news media, because the news media is a function, and I love Barbara here. So this is not Barbara. But the news media and media outlets are not within our purview, because they're a part of the American economic structure, let's face it. But we can control who our young people talk to and who can influence them the most.
Ashley?
Yeah, we need to stop giving, especially in my generation, the excuse of being a double minority, and that keeps coming up. In conversations that I have with friends and with colleagues, that since we have the fact that we're Black and we're a woman, well, we're 2 steps behind everyone else, and so we have to work extra hard to get here and to get there. And unfortunately, I don't think that we are giving ourselves enough credit for the intelligence that we have, the creativity, the innovation that I see amongst so many of my friends that don't want to push themselves to that level because they don't want to get rejected. They don't want to somehow be looked at as not important, not significant because of the color of their skin or the fact that they're not a man. And it's really scary to me, especially coming from a pageant perspective, that a lot of young women look at pageants as well as a negative thing, because they feel like it also feeds into that stereotype of a young woman that doesn't believe that much in her mind. So I have to feed into that as well, that you have to take every opportunity that you're given and mold it into what you need it to be. But we're so taught in that 20-something some odd range that the only time that you're going to be looked at and approved of and seen as successful is when you are in some sort of business and when you're on the top of it. And if you can't get there, why even try?
There is, in each of these generations represented here, though, the Alvian, haven't all of us been told that we have to be twice as good? And
oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And quite frankly, it has worked for and against us in lots of different ways. Can I just jump back to the media issue for just a second, where the videos are concerned? One of the things that one of the prices that we've paid from the having it all concept is that we have had to be gone more. We're out more as women, as mothers, as professionals. We are very busy. And in being busy, a lot of our children have frequently been babysat by the television. And the babysitters have become the greatest influences in our children's lives, which is why reality television seems to be defining the norm for our generations. And the over-sexualization of women as a whole has changed the way that women feel about themselves, how we were received by Black men, how we're received by the society as a whole. But there is a cost that comes with being so busy, and it's the lack of plug-in that older generations, we had those with older women. We had real relationships instead of virtual relationships. And now we have a society that is completely built on a virtual experience, and they're ill-prepared to do the real work.
We have a phone call. Wil LaVeist, I think we know that name here at Another View, one of our roundtable panelists.
Is he allowed to call?
Right.
Hi, Will, you're on the air.
Hey, what's happening, Bob? All I want to know is why can't I be on your show when you got all these bad women? You got to be on the show with Will Thomas. What's up with that?
We'll talk about that later. What's your question, Will?
Yeah, my question is actually to the author of the article, was whether you all found any differences between women who had positive relationships with their fathers versus those who fathers may not have been around, how that impacted their self-esteem.
Wow. Krista?
Gosh, I wish I could answer that question because it's such a good one. But there's nothing in the survey that would answer it. And really in follow-up interviews, I didn't tease it out, but I have to tell you I've been asked more than once. And so like I said, there are other stories coming, and I think I'm going to mention it to the editor who's coordinating to see if something can be done to drill down deeper in that very question.
Absolutely. Well, while we have this panel of women, though, I'd love to get you all's reaction to that.
I would like to add this, that with regards to the statistic about Black women understanding themselves as Black people first or Black persons versus women, that there's a term called womanist, coined by Clenora Hudson Weems and other writers who've written about the intersection of race and gender. And they've talked about Black women seeing themselves as womenist as opposed to feminist, because we see ourselves in partnership with other Black men to make things better in our community that does not include abuse and oppression as you would find in, unfortunately, the white male patriarchy structure in America. And so that could be a reason for why that statistic is as it is, Krista. But to speak to Will's point, I think that we should talk about whether or not the role and or absence of fathers play a huge part in how women see themselves, especially young Black women. Now, as we're listening to a conversation, the discussions with our young sister here, because I think there may be some information, there is some evidence from other studies where when the man is not there, and not necessarily even if the parents are divorced, if the father isn't there, that causes some other kinds of nuances for them that's difficult.
Denise, you want to respond to that?
I do, because I'm divorced and raising two children with no father in the house, and I grew up in a two-parent home, a loving home. And there are a lot of variables to that I know I can't control, and I think you tend to overcompensate for that physical loss in the home. Although he's present and a great father, he's not physically there. But there was a quote in the article that struck me. It says that we were told, and this is generational for me, you may be pretty, but you have to have something going for yourself. And I can remember my dad, looking up all of the top paying jobs and, like stockbroker and engineer, and, this is the future and this is where you need to, focus your thing. And I'm thinking, I'm still trying to reduce fractions. I'm not going to be an engineer and a stockbroker and a financial advisor. Let's just be clear on that. But it was really drilled into my generation that you have to have something to fall back on. It cannot just be a husband looks, whatever you thought you had going. It's not going to carry you all the way through.
Alvian, as a relationship coach, you coach people on relationships and work with them on developing strong relationships. How important is that father figure in that young woman's life as she's growing up?
Quite significant. as a matter of fact, because it's the first experience that a woman has with what they would want to believe is unconditional love. And when the person who is supposed to love you unconditionally is not there, whether he walks out, whether he never chose to show up in the first place, whether something happened between the parents, the children often don't have the ability to be able to separate, to recognize what happened between mom and dad, is not about a rejection of me personally. The inability to do that, and naturally so, quite honestly. It's no fault of an individual to struggle with those issues. But the inability to do that does affect the way the women experience men and how they feel about themselves in the experience of men. Right. Can I count on a partner? Should I even put all of my eggs in this basket? Because in fact, they may not be here for me in the end, which I think adds to the notion that Black women don't really allow men to rescue them. We're so tough, we're so hard, all of that because we've learned that we have to stand on our own 2 feet. And in so doing, it robs men of the ability to be the heroes in our lives. And I've actually heard several Black men say that's the reason why they prefer white women.
Well, you know what? And speaking of that, going to that very next point, and thank you, Will, for that phone call. Krista, there were 2 questions on the survey. First one was, have you ever dated someone of a different race or not? And of the yeses, 50% of Black women said yes versus 40% of white women. 68% of Black men said yes versus 51% of white men. Do you want to respond to that one first, and then we'll go on to the second part of that question?
Sure. Actually, why don't you go on to the second part?
Okay, then the second part was, because this is really interesting to me. The second question was, would you be willing to marry someone of another race? So, okay, have you, and now would you be willing? Black women, 67% said yes. 52% of white women said yes. 80% of Black men said yes, they would be willing to date someone outside of their race, and 82% of white men said yes, that they would be willing to date outside their race. Now, Krista.
Yes. So, those figures were really interesting, especially I thought the second figure, which, while men say that they're more open to marrying outside of their race, there was a significant number of Black women who said they were. Mm-hmm. And when you look at the statistics of how much we actually do, it's significantly lower. Mm-hmm. The most recent study I could find was by the Pew Research Center, which in 2010 looked at the number of newlyweds who reported being married to a partner of a different race. Mm. And for Black women, that was about 9%. For Black men, it was more than twice as much. And so it's interesting, it's just an interesting figure where we say that we're open, but we do it a lot less than our male counterparts. So. Yeah.
Now, Ashley, I have to ask you, because the prevailing thought is that the younger generations have mixed, and actually your generation too, Alvian, that you guys have overcome that racial barrier and that you're interracially dating and it's all good.
Woo!
Ashley?
I've seen a growth. I definitely have. But I do feel that amongst a lot of African American women, and especially those that are really striving to be successful, there's still that sense, and I think it's a positive sense of pride in your culture and pride in your heritage. And even going back to the question that we were talking about just a second ago about having that father figure in your life that you appreciate, and saying that truly is your first love. And so you kind of look for your dad out there. You look for, if it's not your dad, it's your pastor or counselor or whoever it is, your uncle, you look for him out there. And so if he is a Black man, sometimes your first thought is look for a Black man. But I certainly do see that in my generation that the opportunities that are coming towards us are so interracially combined at this point, whether we're talking about schools, whether we're talking about churches, whether we're talking about just social activities. There's so many different races just in those different groups that you almost have to think outside the box. You have no choice because you're meeting these people who are so mentally on the same level as you and want the same things out of life. So we are taking those chances a little more.
Seriously. Okay, go ahead, Denise.
Yeah, I find that that kind of thinking that you can't be, solidly black and love your heritage and your community if you date or love a white man or a white woman. And I think people, I'm an equal opportunity dater. I like a certain kind of guy, and I don't care if he's black or white.
Right.
And I've had black women come up to me, don't know me, and say I should be ashamed of myself because I'm dating a person that I care for and I love. And I thought, you should be ashamed of yourself to putting someone else's love in a box. That's offensive, and it's nobody's business, and doesn't make me any less black, any less proud to be black.
Right.
But I think that hurts a lot of black women.
Let's talk to Angela in Hampton. I think she might agree with you. Hi, Angela. You're on the air.
Hi, how are you ladies doing today?
We're doing great.
Hi, Ange.
I really just genuinely appreciate the fact that this conversation is being had. I am an African-American woman, actually of West Indian descent. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation American, and a very brown skin. I happen to be married to a 6'1", 170-pound, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, purely Caucasian.
Purely Caucasian.
Truly.
Can I just say, oh snap!
I mean, we are diametric opposites in terms of how we show up to the world. And I remember leaving college and being terrified because I hadn't found my future husband while in school, and being bombarded with the constant messages of, as a black woman, if you don't find your man while you're in school, you're probably not going to get married. And if you decide to get even more educated, you are definitely going to be single. And I remember the pushback that I got when I finally broke to my parents, hey, I'm probably going to get married, and my father being flabbergasted that the guy that I brought home was white. And, I mean, we literally had to have a family conversation to the point of an intervention where it was like, Dad, if she wants to be married and she wants to do the things traditionally that you raised her to do, the likelihood is she wasn't going to do that with a black man. Or she was going to do it with so many other issues extenuating to it that it would have never met the standards that you intended for her to begin with. And I remember how much of a taboo it was. And we're talking 6 years ago. We're not talking 1989. We're not talking when I was a teenager. We're talking in a very modern culture where we were supposedly post-racial already, and how uncomfortable it was making that transition. Now, I'm so glad that I did it. I have a fantastic husband. I have 2 beautiful children. But I know that it was so difficult, and even to have it as a real conversation amongst black women and be honest about it was so unusual. It was so like, okay, it's something you try quietly, but in your heart of hearts, you really want your ideal black man. To the point where black women kind of expect me to be apologetic about saying my husband's white, which I'm not.
Now, I understand also, Angela, you are Alvian's sister, are you not?
She's my younger sister.
I didn't talk to it, but I most definitely.
Can't you tell from our level of loquaciousness?
But may I add this?
Go ahead, Kalita.
There's a brother who is a Stanford Law professor, Ralph Richard Banks, who wrote a book, Is Marriage for White People? And it came out last year. And what he posits is that if black women considered marrying options of marrying outside the race, then more of the social power would be equal in the African American community. He goes into a discourse about the unequalness that has occurred within the black community because of the value placed upon black men because of their victimization in American society. And he is a black man married to a black woman, making this this argument. So I think that there are black women, yes, who marry outside the race, but I think black women possess the ability, or at least show more of an ability, to maintain their blackness and to maintain a connection to the community. There are some concerns, there are some scholars who indicate that black men who marry white women seem to somewhat abdicate on their blackness, or seem to have the inability to reconcile who they are versus who they've married. But whatever the case, I think it does go to an issue of black women really not feeling as affirmed as they would like to be, especially poor Black women with meager resources in our community. And I think those are the women who are probably more hurt when they see some of the interracial aspects that we're talking about. Yes.
Ladies, I hate to end this conversation, but we've only got 3 minutes left, and I want to give Ashley an opportunity to promote something that is coming up. So, Krista, we are going to continue to watch and read your stories. We'd love to have you come back at some point as your project progresses, and we can continue this conversation.
Thanks for having me. This was a great conversation. So glad to be a part of it.
Thank you so much. And that was Washington Post reporter Ms. Krista Thompson and Dr. Kalita Nicholas Fairfax from Norfolk State University. Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Denise, thank you for your insights.
Thank
Denise
you,
Good,
Barbara.
who is a federal employee who works here, and Alvian Lyons, who has her own consulting firm and is a relationship coach. You guys were just wonderful, and we must do this conversation again. We must. Absolutely. Absolutely. And we'll be right back. This region has an incredibly rich history when it comes to music. Legends like Ella Fitzgerald and Pearl Bailey are just two of the many artists whose musical talents blossomed right here in the 757. Now there's a film that highlights the influence that Hampton Roads musicians have had on the nation and the world. Our Lisa Godley recently sat down with the producers who have showcased Virginia's incredible musical talent in their documentary titled 7 City Legacy.
Known for her brilliant execution of scat singing, Ella Fitzgerald was considered one of the most influential vocalists of the 20th century. Her talent netted her 13 Grammys and a Presidential Medal of Freedom Award. Lady Ella was also born in Newport News, making her a 7-city legacy.
A tisket, a tasket, a brown and yellow basket. I send a letter to my mommy. On the way I dropped it.
I asked 7 City co-producer Danielle Coley about the film's historic look at musicians and the artistry that stems from the Hampton Roads region.
Our whole aim was to go over a span of several different decades. So we date back to the 20s and 30s with Ella Fitzgerald, Pearl Bailey.
Tired of the tears I've shed, tired of living in the rain.
A lot of them I didn't even know were originally from here, so that in itself was definitely amazing to me. And just to see their progress and how tied and integral they were to this area, particularly like Pearl Bailey. She has a library named after her in Newport News.
While the documentary may start with artists in the 1920s, it quickly moves down a timeline, bringing in artists from the Civil Rights era, like R&B singer and Portsmouth native Ruth Brown. And Norfolk's own General Norman Johnson, the lead singer of the group, chairman of the board. Co-producer Stephen Gale talks about his aha moment while researching and writing the film.
I'm not originally from here, so I didn't really know about the history of the Attucks Theater. And that it was considered the Apollo of the South. General Johnson was born practically next door to the theater and raised in that exact same neighborhood. And it was just like, wow, like this is really a legacy of music and a legacy of artistry and a preservation of culture.
That same music that has touched so many lives over the years continues to influence music today.
General Norman Johnson, he provided samples that artists of today are currently using. You know, Kanye West has sampled him. Mary has sampled him. John Mayer has sampled. You know, their music and their legacy is still integral to music today.
Artists like Antoine Henderson, who goes by the name Hen, can definitely relate to the impact artists from this region have had on up-and-coming performers.
I was a heavy Neptunes, Pharrell Williams and Chad Hugo. I was a big fan of their sound. Before I even knew that they were from this area, when I was living up in Connecticut, my last year living there, I was just, so fascinated by that sound and what they were doing.
Seven City Legacy would not be complete without a look at some of the modern day artists like rapper Keynote Speaker or WHRV's own Jay Sennett. Stephen Gale says their intention is to not only remind some and inform others of this region's rich history, but to help stimulate the arts back into the classroom and bridge the connection between Hampton Roads and its legacy. For Another View, I'm Lisa Godley. Seven City Legacy premiered at the Attucks Theater back in October of last year and will be shown again at the Virginia Beach Public Library in the auditorium on June 28th at 7 p.m. Time now for other things to view and do in Hampton Roads.
You will be my Saturday love.
Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday love. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday love. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday love. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday.
Norfolk families, educators, and concerned citizens are invited to a community conversation on improving a joint commitment to education in Norfolk. The conversation will be held Monday, May 14th at 6 p.m. at the East Ocean View Community Center on 20th Bay Street in Norfolk. There are several other conversations going on this month. Call 628-3459 to find one near you. The Gamma Delta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated will host a Great Health, Great Life community health fair on Saturday, May 19th from 10 until 2. There will be children's activities, screenings, and lots of information to keep you healthy. Call 934-2387 to find out more. And a reminder that May is National High Blood Pressure Education Month, and you are encouraged to have your blood pressure checked. You can do so at the Norfolk Department of Public Health. Call 683-2301 for more information. Just a few of the things to view and do in Hampton Roads. I'm Lisa Godley.
There are more events on our website, anotherviewradio.org. And while you're there, sign up for our eView newsletter. It's a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. For producer Lisa Godley, audio engineer Perry Smith, and the rest of the Another View staff, I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Be sure to join us next Friday at noon on Another View. Have a good weekend, everyone.